Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, you guys know my habit. My habit is to take time to welcome our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things that I personally deem very, very expensive. Time. What a beautiful commodity. Very expensive thing that many of us are not aware how to utilize it. But I know one thing, we all have 24 hours, so you cannot argue that someone had more than you. What you do with your 24 hours will say much about you. The other is the journey. The journey house who they were, pain, strength, all of those things that are in their wisdom, knowledge, all that information that made them who they are today. And we are honored to have Tina here to share both of those expensive commodities with us here at Threads of Enlightenment. Tina, thank you so much for coming
Uh,
into Threads.
Just an incredible honor and my pleasure. Thank you.
It is such an excited time. I'm waiting for this. So tell those, all of the audience, how do you serve others?
So, I am a classical composer. I write music out of a classical tradition. I write for orchestras, ensembles, string quartets, operas, you name it. Many different kinds of ensembles. And I've been doing that for 45 years. I come through a classical music piano background. I was a pianist when I became a composer that many years ago. But recently, this year, I have published a book. I have a copy of it right here. It's called Let Your
Nice.
Heart Be Broken, Life and Music of a Classical Composer. And it's about my life um, and how I compose. So it's not only talks a lot about my process and how I write music, but also my childhood and some of the things that I had to face to get to be a composer and to dedicate myself to this life. And I have to say, I was just reading an old journal of mine. I write a lot of journals. So I usually my day starts where I have my cup of coffee with my dogs. I read the news, and then I'm always reading a novel or nonfiction. I always try to read at least a half an hour, 45 minutes a day. And then I sit down and journal. And that is so that I can help myself organize my thoughts, not only about my life and my children, um, because I always feel I'm in this process of learning and growing and changing, and also my music and my teaching. So I've been reading some old journals, and you had said something about managing our thoughts. And
Yeah.
I was thinking that when I was in college and I was about to graduate, and I was thinking of becoming a composer, composers do not earn a lot of money at
Mm.
all. It's not a great way to support yourself. But fortunately, in the 70s, there was more of a sense of, I could have any kind of job. I worked house cleaning. I worked doing actually, I did a lot of accounting, oddly enough.
Yeah.
I did all sorts of jobs. So I wasn't worried about that. What really worried me is that if I didn't do it, I would be bitter. That at
Yeah.
the end of my life, I would regret not having taken that risk. And I had seen it in my mother that she had really wanted to be a writer, and she was a college professor and mother of 5 children.
Yeah.
But there was a kind of bitterness that she hadn't taken the risk. And I think that has really guided me, is always to take the risk, whether it's been in terms of my emotional health or my work, um, is to be willing to take a risk, because I knew that the backside would be that I would be really bitter and angry at myself if I didn't. And I had seen how that really was very hard to live with as you
Yeah.
as you age, to be bitter.
Yeah.
So anyway,
It's
that's
no, that's a beautiful thing to have that perspective. Um, uh, as a young girl or young woman is very vital because it will guide your life and move you through much. I know for me, um, I remember because we are programmed this way. I remember being a part of the program and many things I wanted to do, but I held off because of quote unquote the children and not realizing one day, much later in my life, I realized as I look back into all the things that I held off because of the children for me, I realized that I could have done them both. And
Mhm.
I, that insight came into me, and I was like, I remember sitting there, Tina, going, wow, I never thought of that because the program didn't allow me to think about it. It would
Right.
have to be an intervention that will allow me to do that. And that intervention was a
Mhm.
thought that came to me and said, you could have done both.
Right.
And I was like, wow. So one of our customs here is to go back. I call it the beginning. Most people call it
Mhm.
family. Tina, I call it the lab, where we have these beautiful scientists that we call parents that loves us, and they are about to experiment with the thesis that they have, which was caused by their trauma and whatever. So
Yes.
their perspective, they have this thesis and this belief system that they're about to put data into you and I, invite us into that family that your mom and dad now are going to deposit things into you that will govern your life.
Yes. So we're talking about the beginnings.
Yeah.
Well, and my story is unusual. Um, I want to say that I've done a huge amount of work on my story as an adult, especially in my 30s.
Yeah.
Um, so I was born in Sweden, in Stockholm, Sweden, and I was placed when I was about 6 or 8 months old in a foster home in Sweden. And I had a Swedish mother and father, and I had three Swedish brothers, foster brothers, and the youngest of whom was only a couple of months older than I was. So we were kind of brought up as twins.
Mm.
And I lived in that household for 3 years. And I spoke Swedish. I was completely integrated into the family.
Yeah.
And then one day, a young, beautiful uh, woman came from America,
Hmm.
and she spent a little bit of time with me, and then adopted me and brought me back to America. And
Right.
there she married uh, and had four more children. So I was the oldest of five. It is a
Mm.
special number of five kids, it
Yeah.
is a special number. So, and I was always loved and fully integrated into the family. But I always felt apart. I think that that is part of what happens with adopted children. There is this enormous gratefulness
Hmm.
to be in this family, but you feel it, maybe it has to be earned.
Yeah.
There is a sense of its precariousness. If I was 6 months and my mother placed me in a foster home, and then I was 3.5 and somebody adopted me, things could change. You're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really completely trusting of what was going on. So I think I grew up uh, outwardly very happy and helpful and funny, but inside I was very quiet and I think I want to say sober. I was
Hmm.
cautious.
Yeah.
So when I was in college, when I was 21, I got a job taking a 13-year-old daughter of a family friend of ours to Sweden
Hmm.
for the summer.
Yeah.
And I thought, right at the end of these 2 months, I thought, oh, maybe I will go to the adoption agency and find out who my parents are. And I'd always thought of myself as being Swedish. Now, I know I
Yeah.
have white hair now, but I had very black hair. And I
Hmm.
was in a country where they truly are blonde and blue eyed. But I
Yeah.
thought, anything could happen. So I got in touch with a Swedish adoption agency, and she said, why don't you come down? I have some
Mm.
information for you. And I went down and she was reading from a letter and she said, "This is a letter from your birth mother." And she'd asked me questions about, my adopted family and everything. And finally she said, "The news I have for you is that your adopted mother is your birth mother."
Wow.
And, just like we're both right now, there was this like silence. It's just like, wait a minute, how do you integrate that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That I've been feeling lonely and disconnected, but I have also been living with my birth mother. But has not told me this.
Yeah.
So I went back, and a week later, I told my mother I knew, and she was actually kind of grateful that I'd found out this way. She hadn't known how to tell me, but she also didn't want me to reveal this to anybody
Wow.
because, because it's understandable. There are two parts of this. It's really understandable, and then you go, what the heck?
Yeah.
It's understandable in the 50s, if you have an illegitimate child, that this was a really great way to protect you, the
Yeah.
mother and the child. You adopt your child. Nobody knows that it's your birth child. And you carry on. But the what the heck part is, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
And I think this is what happens with secrets, is that they become so much a part of who you are that you can't even think of how to be something other than your secret.
Yeah.
It almost has possession of you. And then you start to make choices because you get a little afraid. Maybe if people
Hmm.
find out that I had an illegitimate child, I'd lose my job. Well, 20 years later, that was very unlikely. She was a tenured professor, but your thinking, her thinking was in this sort of paranoid place.
Yeah.
And she felt, I think that the tension between us is that she wanted to describe my life as being the adopted child, and I wanted to own who I really was.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell my story, and she wanted to tell her story as my story.
Yeah.
So I would say that, I experienced a lot of depressions in my childhood and in my college years. And in fact, part of the depressions were, oddly enough, I think this is the other sort of subtle trauma, is that at 3 years old, that was my family.
Yeah.
And when I left, it was as if all my brothers and sisters and mothers and father were in a horrible car accident and had
Yeah.
died.
Yeah.
And I never had the words or the ability to express that sorrow. And I think that part of my severe depressions were around that grief and that loss. And so I had lost a lot of things. I had lost
Yeah.
my family, my
Hmm.
country, my language, my home. And I had also become this other child, who
Yeah.
is cheerful and happy, but always trying to do the right thing.
That is
Um,
some. That is
so,
something, Tina.
so when I had my daughter, when I was in my 30s and I had my daughter, and I write about it in my book, I'm holding her and I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, I could take all this trauma and put it in a beautiful box and, gift wrap it with a beautiful ribbon, and I could just give it to her.
Mm.
That could be her present from her mother. Or I could take this stuff out and really do some very heavy work about dealing with this trauma. And I felt that I wanted to give her the best of me.
Yeah.
And the best of me was something that I had to work for at that point. What was also interesting is that I was also writing music, and I was also writing music about this trauma as well. So there was another outlet. I did a lot of therapy, but I also wrote about this trauma.
Hmm.
and expressed it in musical terms. And I think that was very, very helpful too. But it takes a lot of work to get down to the authentic self.
Yeah.
But that's what an artist is about, is expressing who the authentic person is. And if there's all this stuff in your way, I didn't think I was going to succeed as a composer if I really, and certainly my daughter was not going to thrive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's sort of my backstory.
It's a powerful story. It's one that is laid with trauma, from different levels of it, for a
Yes.
young being to be dealing with and impacting,
Yes.
born and then given to a family, grew up with this family, spoke the language. This individual shows up, have a conversation. Next thing you know, that family is gone. You're in another family,
In
and the
another
uncertainty
country.
in another country. You are in dealing with that underlying feeling of, you know, is the rug going to be pulled from under me? All of those things. And then this is before you're dealing with all of that, before you found out the truth. That is a powerful story.
Well, and how important it is to find the language. You know, children don't have the language to talk about their
Yeah,
trauma. So they need
yeah.
somebody to help them with the language, be willing to listen to them. My mother, it was clear that if I brought up something about being adopted, she really shut down.
Mm-hmm.
I only had to
Yeah.
try it once or twice and I knew. So I do think that real maturity of an adult is finding language to talk about your feelings and to, sometimes they're all balled up like, like
Yeah.
a ball of yarn. It's all of, you can't untangle it. And sometimes you can untangle it, but it takes a long time. Sometimes you have to actually snap the thread and take that little ball and, tie it together because you can't untangle that as much as you would like.
Yeah.
Um, and that doesn't mean you disown it, but sometimes I love in computer language how when they write programming code, sometimes there's a mistake here and they can't really quite fix it, or it would take so much time to fix it. So they create what they call a workaround.
Mm-hmm.
So they work around this problem and find that solution. And I love that kind of concept that
Yeah.
sometimes you do have to have workarounds. Sometimes I think for me, I had always hoped that my process would lead me to a really loving relationship with my mother,
Mm-hmm.
where I had what I felt I wanted as a child. And that wasn't necessarily the outcome. I was able to be kind to her and loving to her, but she was not a person, she was really caught up in her own story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I did have to sometimes temper my hopes for outcome.
Yeah.
My outcome was for me was to be able to stand free of that and live my life in a joyful and productive way. And I have to say that after quite a few years of therapy, the depression started to go away
Mm-hmm.
because my depression was about trauma. It wasn't really clinical depression. So I was kind of
Yeah.
fortunate. It wasn't a chemical depression. It was really around trauma. And so I would say the last 20 or 30 years, I've really been almost completely free of depression, where it had been very crippling for
Yeah.
many, many years. So that is certainly worth all those hours
Is
to have that kind of freedom. And I think
yeah.
that's what we want, is we want to be free so that what we have to offer can truly be offered.
Yeah, I believe that's that's the burning thing within an individual, is that freedom. And we see that millionaires will have millions of dollars and not free,
Yes.
and they will commit suicide or harm themselves.
Yes.
That is someone that is not free. Doesn't matter.
Right.
So then, this money is not what gets you freedom. So people need to understand
Right.
it, because the programming is to get the money, get the wife and the husband, get the house with the white picket fence and the dog. Don't forget the dog. And then you have to, when you do that, um, then what'll happen, maybe you'll be able to get away for a 2-week vacation every couple of years. It's absolutely
Right.
madness. There's nothing
Yeah.
there about you, the individual, to find out
Right.
who you are. So here you are, you're sitting before your daughter, and you're looking at her, and you are at the crossroads, and you're making the choice as to
Yes.
what should I do. And once you've made that decision, I am going to deal with this. I'm going
Yes.
to go on a mission, if you will. When you started that mission, Tina, what was that first step after you had that imagery, that conversation when you were looking at your daughter? What was that next step, and who was it that you go to?
Boy, and how long did those steps take?
Oh, they'll
Yeah,
take
yeah.
forever.
I think, certainly getting a professional that I trusted, that I could talk
Hmm.
to. Um, I think, it's always interesting. I don't think it's one thing that works. What I
Yeah.
found is it took a lot of different things. So, uh, I took a personal growth workshop that was really helpful to me. Then I started doing a lot of yoga,
Hmm.
meditation. Then I started to do a lot of dancing. Um, I had some body work done, which that was very important because I was very tense and, I was really holding a lot of this. And I think they're like, you have to have a pie and like 8 to 10 pieces of the pie, and some of them can be small. Maybe they didn't grow very well, but you've
Yeah.
got it there. Good friends, really supportive friends that will listen to you or that you can listen to them. It's all these tiny little pieces that, for me, started to work to enrich my life. And, I don't think when I started this process that I thought that I was allowed to have a lot of things.
Yeah.
There was a kind of scarcity in my mind, scarcity
Yeah.
of love, scarcity of resources. And I had to do a lot of deep digging around and actually figure out what were my principles, what was really guiding me. Because I
Hmm.
was thinking, love was guiding me. But the truth was, is I really thought that love was really precarious. So love was
Yeah.
guiding me, but it was precarious. So I had to really rethink those values and principles and rename them, really make them my own, as opposed to realizing that my past history had impact on them. And that was really, really important to me. So I had to grow myself up. I really
Yeah.
had to grow myself up. And all the time I was writing music, I was also negotiating in my field. The classical music field is sort of sometimes thinks of itself as very unique and very elevated and doesn't want to have anything to do with singer songwriters or jazz or movie music. So
Yeah.
I was also heading some programs in Philadelphia that really talked about bringing composers, singer songwriters, jazz, movie composers all together under one word, composer,
Yeah.
as opposed to classical music and you can go do what you want.
Yeah.
So I was also wanting to bring more of an integration to my field. I was moving into public schools. I wanted kids to have an experience of composing music the way they had experience creating art. So when you're in kindergarten, you go to your first class and there's an easel over there with paints, and your
Hmm.
teacher puts a smock on you. And then before she sends you over there, she gives you your best art lesson of your
Yeah.
lifetime. And it is, try not to get the paints on the floor. And you go over there and you pick up the paintbrush, and it's yours.
Yeah.
You have ownership of it. Nobody's told you how to do it or what to do with it, except could you be careful and not get the paint on the floor? So that's what I want to always teach in my field, is that creativity is an innate gift that we all have. And maybe and it allows you to do all these art forms. We're all sort of on an equal basis when we start, and
Yes.
I want to have uh, listeners and people who love music just to feel that they're entitled to also create, that it's something they could do. So that a lot of my teaching is around that, is to take away some of the mystery, not to devalue it, but to allow access to everyone. So that's a very important part of my career.
Yeah. Everyone, we came here with this thing called imagination.
Yes.
And which part we allow to be the governor of our imagination will dictate much of our lives.
And we're
Fear will,
creating our entire life. It's a
yeah,
creative force. So
yep,
sometimes people say to me, "Oh, I'm not that creative," and I say, "Oh, I just don't believe that. I
yeah,
think someone told you you weren't creative."
I agree. I
And
100% agree.
so I always want to say yes. That's part of my life, is to say yes,
Yeah.
and to invite people in. So this weekend, I was down at the University of Delaware. I was working with a string quartet and a wonderful pianist. We're doing a recording of 5 of my chamber ensemble works, and it's going to be released in 2024. And one of the things I love is that one of the instrumentalists really asks great questions, like kind of like, why did you do this? Or what's the relationship between this and that?
Hmm.
And that is unusual in my field, to
Yeah.
question the composer. And I love it. I'm like going, yay, ask me those questions, because it means that he felt like he could own my music. Like,
Yeah.
this is the music I'm playing. How come you did this? Like, wait a minute. So I really, really enjoy that kind of intersection.
That's powerful. You have in your life here, you were going through all of these things, discovering traumas and so forth, but you had a couple of um, powerful tools being used. Music is one. You
Hmm.
mentioned about your meditation and yoga.
Hmm.
Those are
Hmm.
some powerful stuff that you
Yes.
can bring into your space to assist you.
Hmm.
And I love what you said. It takes one, like you talked about your self-development classes and certain things will only take you to one level, and then you have to go to another, and so that's why it's designed to have all of these different flavor, if you will, because I think if it was just one thing, it would be stagnant. And again, that imagination, as I mentioned, there are two managers of it, if you allow it, is fearfulness and creativity. You allow
Yes.
creativity to dance in your imagination,
Yes.
you're going to come up with some beautiful stuff. And so you have to decide which one you want to have management skills or management time over your imagination. But that imagination is a powerful thing because it will make you see, and it will activate other things that will bring to pass what you want and what you're
Absolutely.
imagining. So
And I
yeah,
think it's really important to know that there's not like one fix. It's
no,
not like you're done, like you're
yeah.
cooked. It's like you're always in a process of growing. And there's always going to be challenges. Um, Certainly, as I get older, there of course, there are physical challenges, but I think the bigger challenge might be, how am I relevant? How is
Yeah.
my music still appropriate for this time and era? What do I
Yeah.
still have to say or to do? Um, and uh, I think sometimes people feel that enlightened folks don't have to deal with any of that concern or worry. And that's not accurate.
Yeah.
It's, I think I have more tools now that I can rely on
Yes.
to dig myself out of something. Um, but also, a lot of that trauma comes, what do they say in Al Anon? That if you're dealing with a problem and you solve it, it just goes and changes clothing and gets back in line. So, you do have this sense of deja vu and having to,
Yeah.
but one should remember that that's part of the process. Don't be discouraged by it, because it
Yeah.
is part of who we are. We don't fix things.
Yeah.
We deal with them, and then we deal with them again. And perhaps every time we deal with them better.
Yes, I think that's what it is. We get more skillful. So
Yes.
here you are, as you are working on you, and you begin to recognize, Tina, the changes. You begin to notice them, if you will. First, you know how we are. We are just tunnel vision, and we want to get better. We want to get better, and we're doing all 100 different things. And then one day, life is a little slower, if you will.
Yes.
That day we got up and we have our coffee, and the wind is in the right direction. And that thought pops in, and you begin to realize, wait a minute, I've come a long way. And you
Yes.
begin to have that dialogue with yourself. What was that day, if you can remember that day, one of those days when you sat there and go, wow, um, I have progressed. And how did
Right.
it make you feel when you saw you, and then when you looked over and saw that precious daughter of yours, and how did it make you feel?
Right. It's interesting because this book deals with my life up to 2000,
Hmm.
which is now 20 years ago. And the book ends on a very positive note. I really had done a lot of work on forgiveness with my mother. And what I found with forgiveness is that it brought me to kindness. I could be
Yeah.
kind to her. I could take care of her as she aged. But one of the things that I hadn't learned, and I didn't know that I hadn't learned at that point, was boundaries.
Hmm.
And so I remarried and found myself um, 20 years late, not 20 years later, but 15 years later, separated. Um, and I think buying myself, I spent about 4 years after my divorce, sort of just renting places and living here and there. And then finally, I decided I was going to buy a home.
Yeah.
And that was such a gift to me, because I had not only learned all the lessons of forgiveness and dealing with trauma, but I had finally learned about boundaries, which are
Hmm.
difficult, I think, particularly difficult for women, because they're brought up to care for others, or that's
Yeah.
sort of the subtext behind them. So to be able to say no in a loving and connected way, and deal with some of, the pushback. You know,
Hmm.
People don't like it when you say no.
Yeah.
But to experience that and to create for myself an environment, a sanctuary, a home, a place where I could really love being, that was truly an amazing. Uh, it's hard to believe that I'd have to wait until my 60s to get it, but it felt very well earned.
Yeah.
Um, and I was surprised that I hadn't known about boundaries. I thought I did. I really did. I really thought I knew about them.
Yeah.
Um, but I had spent 10 years sort of giving myself away slowly,
Yeah.
Of course, I had three just wonderful stepchildren that I adored, plus my daughter. Um, but I think being in my 60s and really taking account of my life and being willing to move on, having learned some of those lessons, um, was quiet and joyful. You know, I wake up every day and actually when I go to sleep, it's hard for me to go to sleep because I'm so excited about waking up the next day. I can't wait to have my cup of coffee. It just seems like the coolest thing. Um, and I'm not saying that I don't have hard times and
No.
that I'm not sad or I have difficulties or, you know, I don't want to paint a picture like, oh, wow, but that I feel very stable and calm and quiet. And I have learned to live a life where I always say that I have a pretend, an imaginary electric fence going around my property, and it's the fence. So if you would come and visit me, but you've got a lot of drama that you want to bring, you would like be at my walkway, and you go, how come I can't go any further? Um, and it's not that I don't listen to my children or listen to their drama or be with them, but I don't take on their drama. I don't
Yeah.
allow it to control my life. Uh, I'll, you know, say, "Oh, I hope that you'll find a good solution for this." I'm thinking of you, sending you love.
Yeah.
I don't try to implicate myself or fix things, which is also really important. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
One
So
of
I've
the
had
hardest
time
thing
to, right?
one of the hardest things for people pleasers is that developing that those boundaries because
Right.
you don't know how because
Right.
you think it's against your personality or it's against you, but it is boundaries are designed to save you and for you and to protect you. I grew up in the church and I tell people about boundaries. I said, every time you see Jesus, he's like, I got to get out of here. He's up in the mountains somewhere. I got to get out of here. And so you see him all constantly getting away from all this noise. And so he had boundaries. And so we have to have boundaries so that we can be able to get in touch with ourselves. Because when
Right.
you get to that area, when you're separating, I call it that space of solitude, and it's one of the most powerful places to be because you begin to excavate a lot more stuff about you in your quiet time. And
Mhm.
as you stated, you don't allow people to get into your space. What did you learn? You learned that you need to live and be aware of who is presenting before you with their drama, and you have to allow them to be in their drama for them to grow out and from
Right.
it. But
Yes.
where it doesn't affect you, you are,
Right.
and in order to be in that space, man, you have to live in a state of awareness, or you before you know it, you're
Yes.
grabbing all their drama. So yeah,
You
you.
said that right. You really have to learn to be in a state of awareness. And I think there is one way of being with people who are in drama who are getting help
Mhm.
and dealing with their drama. And then there are people who are living in their drama and just kind of happy to be in their drama.
Mm,
And I
yeah.
think that's a big distinction. And I am more willing to to keep the people who aren't really helping themselves at more of a distance
Yeah.
because sometimes they like being there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
or I mean there have been times in my life where I kind of had to get to the bottom rung. I mean, I do believe I've been sober for 13 years, and so I've done the whole AA program.
Yeah.
And it is
Congratulations,
very
man.
important. I think part of that lesson, which is such
Yeah.
a life lesson, is you almost have to be at your worst to say, wow, I better change this.
Yeah.
So there's not really any saving somebody because, in a way, when you see other people suffering and doing self destructive things, they are probably the only person that can save themselves.
Well, they
Sadly.
are the only person.
Yes.
You can, and I tell people this is a necessary thing. That again, using information that I learned in church, sometimes some people have to go and eat with the pigs. With the prodigal son, he had to go and eat with the
Yes.
pigs, and then it was while he was there that he made a decision that will change his life. And so
Right.
many of us have to go to that place, and there's nothing wrong with it, but you can't save them.
No.
And so they have to
No.
come to that realization
Right.
that I need to do something. And so what he did was, he said, I can eat better at my dad's house. The servants are eating better. So he's got up and embarked on a journey.
Right.
Now think about that young man, because he
Yeah.
took his money and he left. So he has to go back in there to face his father, who broke and eating with pigs. And so he had to
In
humble
a sense
himself.
of humble humility.
Yeah,
I mean, I think there are many times where
yeah,
you just have to say, I'm not a religious person, but I'm a very spiritual person. And that
yeah,
act of humbling yourself or uh, throwing yourself on the floor, face down,
hmm,
saying, help me.
yeah. That's where you
I
need to be.
lift me up. It is an important part of the healing process is
Hmm.
to be willing to get help, want something better for yourself.
Yeah,
And it's a wonderful thing to hold on. Sometimes that's the only thing that you can hold on to pull you out of that mud.
yeah,
It's your lifeline.
yes. It
Help
is.
me.
Yeah.
And that sense of, um, yeah, just, I always think of, how the great, monks and, go up to the altar and they just throw themselves down face,
Yeah,
that kind of like, I need help.
yeah.
And I think that is a wonderful moment of a change. It's really palpable. Like you may not have changed that much, but that you're ready to change is so huge.
It
So
is
huge.
everything, because if
Yeah.
you're not ready to change, you will not change. My mom used to say this little thing. She said, "Change is not change until you're changed." I used to laugh every time she said it,
Right.
but it's great wisdom, because one has to become sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I call it, when you get there, I call it the statement of faith, meaning that you're going to say something only you believe, and you're going to believe this more than anything else, because whatever you said to you is going to be more powerful. It's so powerful that it's going to get you to get up and start taking the steps necessary to come to make whatever you said to yourself come to pass. And that, when
Tiny
you're at
steps.
that, yes, when you're at that space, then
Right.
you're ready to change your life. And you
Right.
will change your life, because you
Yes.
made it to you. I didn't make you do it.
Right.
No one made you do it. You made you do it. And because you made you do it, you will do it, because you realize that I need to move from this space to another one. And you will
Right.
seek everyone and anything to get you out of that, whether it's a help from someone, a coach, whether it's
Mhm.
information, going in to look and seek things. You would not believe what will happen to you right there in that space. People will come that have been waiting, because we are all energy, have been waiting for you to make that decision. And
Right.
you'll see them coming in your path and having a conversation that triggers you and points you in a direction
Right.
that you need to be. So it's all up to you, but nothing will happen until you're ready. And when
It
you're
is true.
ready, you'll be ready, you know?
And I think the real hope is if you're going in this direction and you make a slight change, you just have to make a tiny change.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you're going, instead of going here, you're going suddenly, even with this tiny change, you're going that direction. You don't have to make an about face.
Yeah.
You just have to do something. And yeah,
A
I
little
agree.
shift in your
Hmm.
perspective. That's what that little
Hmm.
something is. Now this guy
Yeah.
is eating with his pig, enjoying his meal for a while, and then he said, "Wait a minute, I don't like pig food anymore. I don't want to,
I'm tired of
um,
this.
I'm tired of this." And that shift in perspective, where he was okay because he was whatever he was dealing with, but he had to surrender all of that and switched. He says, I got to go to my father.
Hmm.
I need to be
Hmm.
humble. And when he made that switch, he did everything possible to begin that journey. And he kept moving one step at a time. And if people don't think about this guy, because this guy is, he's coming back humbled. He has to go before his father, and pretty much, but his father was expecting him. Why? The energy, um,
Right.
people are there, so that's what's going to happen to you. Trust me, man. So here you are, Tina. Um, you have changed. You're watching and you witness all of this thing. You are now the spectator, and you're seeing you as you grow. And you mentioned that you're now in your 60s and you're learning your boundaries and so forth
Mhm.
and living in the present. How is your music and your writing of music? Um, how did it change in your life today? And how is
Yes.
it being used by
Mhm.
you, from you, out of you, to begin to minister to those that are around you?
So that's a great question. And I do want to clarify that I left my marriage in my 60s. I am now 70 and a joyful, happy 70. And
You don't look it, girl. You don't look anywhere.
I always want to tell my age because I think it's important for people to see what 70 looks like.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah, is that 70? Yeah, I am 70. So, um, when I was beginning to compose in that first 10 years before my daughter was born, I was writing music that, as I look back at it now, I don't think it really represented me.
Hmm.
Although I think it represented where I was,
Yeah.
which was in a state of not knowing who I was.
Yeah.
And when my daughter was born and I was starting therapy, I was writing a cello concerto. And it was after a poem that my sister wrote, which was called Blood Memory.
Hmm.
And I was thinking of how your heritage or your blood heritage
Yeah.
is also how it's course all those traumas of previous people are coursing through my veins. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about how the memory of that affects me. And it was the first piece that I wrote that I felt really represented me. And I was very excited. And so I would say in the next decade, so in the second decade of composing music, I was really writing music as I was connected to myself.
Yeah.
I was writing pieces like I have a cello quartet, which is called Dark Child Sings. And it was about that dark child in me
Yeah.
singing out, being allowed to have a stage and to sing out not only the trauma, but once you express the trauma, you can grow from it and
Hmm.
become more and more joyful. So I was writing a lot about myself and who I was trying to define myself as. And towards the end of that decade, I started being interested in my connection to the exterior world. So you might think of it as God or the higher power or the spiritual realm. You might think of it as nature or energy or light. I was really interested in growing my connection with the things that were outside of me. And that was about the next 20 years, not
20
20
years.
decades,
Yeah.
2 decades of writing. So I was writing things that, a title of one of my pieces is called It Is My Heart Singing. So this
Hmm.
expression of opening up my heart and allowing that out. I have another piece called Delight of Angels, that, according to tradition, Jewish and Christian tradition, the angels dance endlessly in the
Yeah.
joy of being with God. They are
Yeah.
so happy and at one with God that they just endlessly dance. And I wanted to write a piece about that kind of relationship. One of the pieces that we just recorded is called Barefoot,
Hmm.
and it's about being outside in your bare feet and touching the earth, that connection with the earth, which is also something outside of me, this beloved planet. But it's
One of my
also
favorite
about,
things to do.
yes, but it's also about the burning bush
Yeah.
and how Moses has to take off his shoes and is
Hmm.
barefoot in front of God,
Yeah.
because you can't be in a divine presence with your shoes on,
Yeah.
with with that out, with so it's really a joyful exploration of that relationship with being with the earth or with God in a vulnerable way,
Hmm.
in a kind of a primal, in an unshod, you don't have
Yeah.
shoes on. So I think now, and my music became very rhythmic, very energetic. I had a lot of energy in my life. And now as I'm older, I would think, I think it's becoming more personal. When
Yeah.
I'm composing is, I wouldn't say quieter, but it is more personal
Yeah.
about me. And of course, that I wrote a book. I'm writing a second book now. I'm writing a lot of articles about music because I want people to understand it better and feel more comfortable being with it.
Hmm.
And I think that as you go into your 70s, maybe the work of those years is legacy.
Yeah.
How has my work in my life counted? What are the things that are left undone? Um, certainly with our children, we're building a lot of legacy with grandchildren and with
Yeah.
history to come, with a future that we will not see. Um, so I am really interested in that, and I don't have quite as much energy as I used to have. So I take more joy in gardening or walking the dogs or being with my wonderful children.
That's still some powerful expression, if you will. Spending time with the dog and walking with
Yes.
and being with the children, and it's just a part of moving to as we are growing and evolving as an individual, and life is present. And I tell people I've seen dead people that are in their 20s, so it doesn't matter,
Right. I
So
think it's part of spiritual practice,
yes,
being
I
present.
agree.
I think it's part of honoring one's life,
Yeah.
to be present with what is. And, we haven't talked about service yet, but I like how we
That's
have
where I was going.
the, you've talked about, I would say it's supplication, being humble, but
Hmm.
supplication. And service is another word that sort of grows out of that idea. I think when I can be unfettered or untethered by my trauma and by my kind of crazy thinking or
Yeah.
destructive thinking,
Yeah.
I can be the most available to others to do what I feel I was put on this earth to do. And I think service is complicated. I don't think service is necessarily going into old people's homes and taking care of people or going out
Yeah.
to homeless people. I think it is serving others with your talents, with the things that you do the best, that
Hmm.
maybe you were put on this earth to do, whatever that is. I think part of what my work is not only to write music, to articulate feelings in another art form, so to speak about feelings in sonic ways,
Yeah.
which don't have words attached, but it is also to encourage others to love their own creativity, to honor their own creativity, to believe and trust in their own creativity. And when I go into circumstances, organizations that want my help,
Yeah.
usually I say, look, I can do all these things. These are my talents.
Hmm.
How can I serve you? How can I, I'm going to have to use this talents. I can't cook meals for you.
Yeah.
That wouldn't, because I'm not very good at that. I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. And I'd be happy to take out the trash. I don't have any problem with taking out the trash. But if you were going to use me for this 70 years of accumulation of work, what do you see here that might help you? And sometimes I worked with the YWCA. They had a homeless shelter. I went in with their parenting program, and I supported and helped the women as part of a parenting initiative to be better parents, to write music
Hmm.
about their relationship with their children.
Wow.
And that was a really great way of using my talents to help serve these women in connecting more deeply with their children and renewing and strengthening that relationship.
What an honor.
Uh,
That is.
so that's what I'm always looking for, sort of that back door of I can do these things. How
Yeah.
could you use me in a really interesting and inventive way?
That is, like I said, that's an honor to be able to allow yourself to be used
Yes.
that way and used. I tell people that our our gift. One of my friends, she said, we think that we use the gift, but the gifts use us. And
Yes. Oh my
I
gosh.
like that way.
Totally, totally. I totally, yes. I mean,
I
it was such a learning experience for me in so many different ways. And it really fueled how I decided to do this whole program. I was living in Philadelphia at that time, and I spent the next 20 years teaching in public schools as an artist in residence. And then finally realized that I really needed to teach teachers how to do
yeah,
this because I was only sort of a band-aid to a problem.
yeah.
But I needed to encourage others to do this. So that was yes. I was the winner in that. I think
uh,
again, when you serve in a funny way, you are the recipient, one of the recipients.
yes, it's designed that way. That's
Yes.
where you get your energy from.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know.
And it's not about negating who you are. It's about
Mm-mm.
bringing the best of who you are
Yeah.
to that moment.
Yes. And when you do that and you are in that space, you gain so much strength and energy from there. And people, you can do that all day long, and people will say to you, "Aren't you tired?" And you look at them and say, in pretty, just in amazement, like, "No, I feel as if we're just getting
Yes.
started." And so
Right. Right.
it is the opposite effect. But they're looking
Hmm.
into it. To them, it's exhausting because that's not their gift. That's
Right.
not where they belong. And so anyone looking into your world will be exhausted because that's not you, but you looking into theirs and looking at, and while you're doing yours, you're like, can I help you? Can I serve you?
Yeah.
You want to keep
Yeah.
going. And
Right.
then when you
Right.
get home, you sit down, you lay down, and then you begin to um, let all of that seep in, smiles come on your face, all kinds of different things begin to happen in that space. So yeah,
But I do have a caveat, and the caveat is you have to do it with boundaries.
always.
Because it is true, if you serve and serve and serve and serve, you can totally exhaust yourself and then have nothing to give, or
Yeah,
you can burn out. And so I think that you're always balancing how you are nurturing yourself and supporting yourself as well as serving others is such an important balance. It's not one without the other.
yeah, you burn
There,
out because you have no boundaries.
Right, exactly. Oh,
That's that.
those naughty little things, those boundaries. They're like gremlins, they're
Yeah.
like, can I take you now?
Yeah, I believe people burn out because they have no, and that's when you know you have no boundaries. That's one of the
Mhm,
guideposts that you can
mhm,
identify. Like, wait a minute, I need to develop some boundaries, and so
mhm,
I know that a lot of people. This is one of the hardest hurdles to cross to get over, because again, most of us were program because of our trauma. We became people
mhm.
pleasers, and
Yes.
because we want to please all the time, we don't know how to shut that off.
Mhm.
But it is necessary in order to save yourself. Um,
Yes.
Tina, this has been a beautiful conversation, and we can keep going for a while. This is so calming to me as I'm having this with you.
Uh,
You know,
Well, I was wondering if I could share two things before
you can
we
share
finish.
anything you
Yes.
want. Go ahead.
So I was asked by another podcaster to write 10 things that I wanted to share, 10 little points.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I came up with 11, but then when I was thinking of other composers, I have a list of like 22. But
Mm.
these are number 10 and 11. Number 10 is share your joy, communicate your love of the work with others, share rather than teach, motivate rather than lecture, include rather than talk to. Teaching implies a hierarchy. Sharing is between equals. So as uh, a life goal, share your joy.
Yeah.
And another life goal is dare to create yourself anew. Heartbreak, failure, being sidelined, all of these are part of life. It is how we act on these, manage them, learn, move through them, and dare to try again in a strengthened position that matters.
That is
Dare to
powerful.
create yourself anew.
Yeah, the
Always.
dark
Every day,
always.
maybe.
I for me it's every day, and I tell people the dark times come to make you aware of the creator that resides within you.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know that that creator existed until
Mm-hmm.
when you need it. It's
Yes.
residing right there. So again,
Yeah.
Tina, thank you, guys. I'm going to provide everything for you to get access to her. I want you to buy a book, get the books, give it out as presents, and to others so that you can help them. And we are excited that she was here and sharing her journey with us. And so, Tina, I want to thank you again for coming to Threads of
Oh,
Enlightenment.
my pleasure, my privilege. I've just been a delightful way to spend time with you.
Thank you.